Good afternoon and welcome to this month's Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee meeting. I wonder if members of the committee could introduce themselves, please. Councillor Hussain.
Councillor Yusra Hussain for Batley West Ward.
Councillor Cooper.
Andrew Cooper, Councillor for the Newsham Ward.
Councillor Bill Armour, Kirkburton Ward.
Thank you. And we're also joined by Councillor Mather, the Cabinet Member, responsibility for item 7. And I'm Councillor Liz Smage, Chair of the panel, and we have apologies from Councillor Ramsey. Do anybody have any points to raise on minutes of previous meetings? We have a couple of minutes that are there. No, can we agree those minutes then, please?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody have any interests they need to declare at this point in time? No? No. Thank you. And all items are in public today. Deputations, we haven't received any. And we haven't received any petitions either. Or any public questions. The webcast of this meeting will be available after the meeting via the council's website for people to watch if they wished. So we move swiftly to item 7, which is Kirklees Armed Forces Covenant. Councillor Mather, you've introduced this item.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to be here to update you on the progress we have made. I am the council lead for Armed Forces Covenant. We have a small presentation and a report and would be happy to take questions after the presentation has been given by Vina. And I'm supported this morning by Joanne Bartholomew. And
I believe we have a board member, an Armed Forces Covenant board member online as well. Yes. So Vina, do you want to give the presentation, please?
I certainly will do. Just bear with me while I bring it up. Can you all see that clearly?
Yes, that's fine, thanks.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, so as Councillor Mather said, that I'm here to give an update on progress since we last attended Scrutiny, which was in December 2021, which was just after the Armed Forces Act was enshrined in law. And we're here to share progress since we attended, some of the next steps in terms of actions that we'll be taking forward, and provide an opportunity for Scrutiny members to provide feedback and suggestions on other actions that we might want to take to raise awareness of the Covenant, and also ensure that service personnel and veterans aren't disadvantaged when accessing essential services. So the first slide is just a reminder of the Armed Forces Act. So the Act was enshrined, it enshrines the Armed Forces Covenant into law to help prevent service personnel and veterans from being disadvantaged when accessing essential services. And the Act places a legal duty, the Covenant duty, on specified public persons and bodies to have due regard to the principles of the Armed Forces Covenant when exercising certain statutory functions in the fields of healthcare, education and housing. The Armed Forces Covenant was established in 2011, and since then 10,000 different organisations nationally have chosen to sign a pledge to honour the Covenant and support their armed forces community. In Yorkshire and Humber, this includes 13 local authorities and 700 other organisations, including universities, charities and businesses. And for Kirklees, we signed initially in 2012, and then we re-pledged our support to the Covenant in 2017, and that was cross-party pledge to the Covenant. As a reminder, the Armed Forces Covenant is a promise from the nation that those who serve in the armed forces, and that's regular or reserve, those who have served in the past and their families should face no disadvantage compared to other citizens in the provision of public and commercial services, and that in some instances, special treatment may be appropriate, especially for the injured or bereaved. So this provides a summary of the covenant duty. So when a specified body, which could be local authority, NHS, education or housing provider, exercises certain relevant functions, and for the sake of the covenant, that's education, housing and health, it must have due regard to these three principles. So the unique obligations of and sacrifices made by the armed forces, the principle that it's desirable to remove disadvantage arising for service people from membership or former membership of the armed forces, and the principle that special provision for service people may be justified by the effects of the membership or former membership of the armed forces. The details of the specified public bodies and relevant functions in scope of the covenant are in the report at table 2. In terms of due regard, the Act doesn't state what a body has to do to have due regard. However, the covenant duties should be reflected in our policies and procedures to ensure that we think about and place an appropriate amount of weight on the principles of the covenant when we deliver certain relevant functions. And whilst it's desirable to remove disadvantage arising from members of the armed forces community that are within scope, it should not be assumed that everyone associated with the armed forces community experiences disadvantage because of their service life. And when we talk about special provision, it's about taking action that goes beyond the usual support provided to reduce or remove disadvantage. And these actions, these are actions that could result in the provision of something bespoke or something not normally available to the general public. In terms of the statutory guidance that was published last year in November, and whilst the duty isn't prescriptive about the actions we should take to promote awareness of the duty and the issues faced by the armed forces community, the guidance has provided some examples of the types of things that we might want to consider adopting that are based on existing good practice nationally from other areas. The progress that we've outlined in table 3 of the report is based on the key actions within the covenant guidance, so based on good practice. And I've summarised some of the key areas in the next few slides. So appointing individuals. So we have the cabinet member champion and elected member champion in place. And we also have an officer champion and also a director champion. And we all help to drive the work forward in terms of the priorities and the board membership and developing the action plan. We also have a number of service reps on the board who act as service champions and the first point of contact for service-specific inquiries. We are keen to grow the number of service champions that we have in the organisation, so we have a survey planned to help identify staff that have a military connection in the hope that some of them may be interested in being service champions to help raise awareness of the covenant given their unique experience. In terms of communication and engagement, this is an important element of our work. It's only through engaging with and involving other partners that we can deliver our pledge to the armed forces. So we do a lot of networking on a regional level, and I also liaise with the Covenant team for advice and guidance, the team that's based at Whitehall. Our board membership is diverse and it's regularly reviewed. And just recently, we've had a couple of reps join from Calderdale and Huddersfield NHS Trust, as well as a couple of reps from local charities, the Rural Veteran Hub and Tommy's Lounge. We've also reached out to Mid Yorkshire Hospital NHS Trust to ask for a rep to join our Covenant board, and are also trying to engage with the GP practice network so we can attend to raise awareness of the duty, the work of the board, and explore how we can work together. Going on, we have a dedicated web page which is updated regularly and will be again very soon to make clearer the support available from the council to members of the armed forces community. And we've added 2 new e-learning modules for customer-facing staff to My Learning, and we'll be promoting that to staff in order to help further raise awareness of the Armed Forces Covenant and principles. And there's good practice case studies provided in that e-learning, which will help further some of the understanding within the organisation. In terms of collaboration and research, just very briefly, the board itself acts as a forum for sharing information, good practice and collaborating on priorities and also networking. And we do have a couple of actions in development that will help us understand our armed forces community, our staff survey, and also a Kirklees survey that we're currently exploring as well. In terms of our vision, we have an action plan that's been developed with board members and is reviewed at each board meeting. And I've included just a few examples of the recent successes around our committee report guidance, and also the integrated impact assessments that are now have the Armed Forces Covenant reflected in them, and that's to help ensure due regard, and also as a reminder that the council does offer a guaranteed interview scheme for armed forces veterans that meet the essential criteria, and additional paid leave for reservists to attend their annual training camp. In terms of next steps, very briefly, I've summarised some of the actions we're currently taking forward that I've mentioned previously. So the action plan aligning to the Covenant duty guidance, updating the web page so it's easy to navigate and our commitment is clear, promoting the new e-learning for customer-facing staff, carrying out a survey to help identify staff that have a military connection, and broadening our membership as well, including our NHS colleagues within the Mid Yorkshire Hospital Trust and the GP Practice Network. And just finally, some further actions, which I have touched on already, liaising with the Data and Insight Service to look at a Kirklees Armed Forces Covenant survey with our partners, exploring costs to deliver the military human training for frontline staff, and exploring costs to develop some video case studies to provide insight into military culture and the issues facing veterans and their families when they leave the armed forces. We're also working with partners to develop drop-in support and advice sessions, and hopefully we will be working with partners to mark Armed Forces Day in 2024, so having something local in Kirklees. That's the last of my slides, but I'm just conscious that Councillor Mather may want to come in with some additional comments, and also Joanne and maybe Richard as well. So I will give them an opportunity if they want to add anything additional to the slides. Thank you.
Is anybody, Councillor Mather?
I'm quite excited in relation to what we are doing and what we hope to do. It's not, you know, it's something that we can deliver, and it's something that we will work in partnership. I'm also quite keen to make sure that we identify our own personnel, we make sure that our champions are in place, and basically in terms of our services we make sure that our serving personnel, or those that have served, get the services that are outlined. And I think we've got community champions in education, housing, and I think we have written it into some of our documentation that to pay special attention to that particular community. Thank you.
Richard, board member from the Armed Forces Covenant Board, do you wish to add anything to this at this moment in time?
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm okay at this moment in time. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. So can I ask you, Councillor, sorry, Joanne, did you have anything? Okay. Councillor Mather, can I open the questions then by asking yourself then? You are the Cabinet Member Champion. It also says an elected member champion. Is there two people, or is just the one person? It's just the one person. And so ensuring the visibility and access to services and networks is part of the champion's role. So can you give us some examples of how that champion role is promoting with that visibility? I'm especially thinking it's Armed Forces Week, isn't it, this week as well? So if you've got any examples, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So at the moment, we are working to ensure that the council is present in terms of the social media, in terms of making sure that people know that we support our armed services during the week. We in partnership. We have been going out, as was mentioned by Vina, Tommy's Lounge as a drop-in, and to be able to develop it further. The board meetings we held recently, I think it was last week or the week before, and Richard is part of that board. And by increasing the participation, you're actually making sure that you're rolling it out. So, and also the other things that we are doing is making sure that we are raising awareness within the council and the council services, especially housing, education and health. So, and I hope to go out and meet serving personnel. I did that last year. I can't remember how many events I did go to. I'm hoping to increase our presence. We will be, actually, we may not be putting anything on ourselves, but we will be present when partners are putting events on during this week, is it this week or next week? This week. And I think there are drop-in centres that other partners are doing that are on our board that I will be attending.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Cooper?
Thanks for that. A couple of questions really, just to get to understand things a bit better. The training of the frontline staff. One of the things it says in here is that the e-learning module for customer-facing staff is now available for all staff on the Council's My Learning webpage, and that the Armed Forces Covenant and Homelessness e-learning will be added to the My Learning in the next month, after which both modules will be promoted to all staff. I'm just wondering whether actually it should be a requirement actually for staff to do that. So that's one question, because I'd have thought, really, if they're to understand it, it should be a requirement, not just an option.
Through you, if I may, Chair. So the My Learning modules cover every type of training that we have, so regardless of your role function within the council. So there'll definitely be some key services in which we would have an expectation that those individuals would look at and complete the online training, and so that's for myself as the senior officer responsible, and as the officer responsible for housing solutions, to ensure that my services roll that out across them. Right. Very easy for us to track because we get data information back from My Learning, so we can see, very similar to when we want to make sure everybody's had their fire safety awareness training and all those. So there'll be certain key services where it is important that that training has been completed, and it'll be the duty of the service director to ensure that that does do. And what we don't tend to have in the My Learning is very many absolute you must do this, because we want a set of responsibility from the services to ensure that that happens. But what I did see at the last board meeting chaired by Councillor Mather was a number of the service reps asking for information, wanting to understand more, wanting to know how their role was going to work. So definite willingness within the services to learn and move that forward.
So just to follow up on that then, will there be some stats on how many frontline staff who are relevant take this up?
There's no reason at all why that information wouldn't come here. Information on a whole host of stats, particularly around veterans, the services they're accessing, the ethnicity of veterans, age range, and a whole host of other dynamics has been asked for by Chair. So what I'm sure Vina will do is add to that the take-up of the courses and the relevant directorates. I can see that Vina is indicating, she's probably wanting to tell me that I've said the right thing there, I hope.
Yes, absolutely, Joanne. Yeah, just to say that both of those e-learnings are actually on My Learning now since the report was published. And there's some communications that will shortly be going out to raise awareness of that training. In the past, when we've had the e-learning, it's been certainly via just a web a link. So we haven't been able to monitor the take-up within the organisation, but now that it's on My Learning, we will be able to look at the stats and see who is actually accessing it. Something else that we are looking to do to support that, and I've not included it in the next step because it's the capacity required to do it, and I wasn't sure how quickly I could organise it, is to organise some service-specific sessions. So we're looking at possibly a housing masterclass, bringing our housing services together to share awareness about the covenant and maybe work with some volunteers from the armed forces to come and share their story. We want to do it in partnership with our board members and locally our local charities as well, to sort of really explain the experience that our service personnel have had in accessing essential services, that we can reflect on that and think about how we can improve that moving forward.
Okay. Is your next question, Councillor Cooper, on housing in particular? Because I think Councillor Armour has a question on that subject. So whilst it's been mentioned, Councillor Armour.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm about 12 months, I'm going back about 12 months, so hopefully things have changed a wee bit. But I dealt with a case revolving around a couple, the husband being ex-services, the wife, of course, being part of the services family, if you like. So they both fall under the code. Without going into too much detail, they were separating as a result of PTSD, which he allegedly suffered as a result of service. And it was very, very difficult, and in fact, in the end, I failed to find a satisfactory solution to the need for them needing 2 units of social housing rather than 1. And it wasn't satisfactory. I'm not blaming any Kirklees employees. I understand the code is not written by Kirklees, but I think we perhaps ought to look at the interpretation of it. It looks weak, and frankly, if we're not careful, it can start to look like tokenism. We can say, yes, we've signed up to this code, but I think we need to pay more attention, particularly in the area of housing, to the idea of special treatment because of the circumstances. Now, within the armed forces, many people, certainly below officer rank, are forced during the service to live in provided accommodation with a single person or married couple, married quarters. So when they come out of service, they don't have a house. They're very often going to be reliant on social housing. Social housing, I appreciate, problem, long waiting lists, I do appreciate this. But I think we ought to consider paying more attention to the idea of special treatment when it comes to housing allocation. As I say, I'm going back 12 months, hopefully we've improved, but I wasn't impressed. Not a comment on Kirklees employees at all. I wasn't impressed by that. Thank you.
So I think what we're asking is what are the special provisions, isn't it? And how have things improved? And how are we not just having the covenant in place? How is it actually working in practice around housing? Was that, Councillor Armour, what you...
Yes, I think that's a pretty fair summary, Chair.
So, Councillor Armour, I would like to reassure you we will do the best we can in terms of housing. For instance, you know as well as I do there are 17,000 on the waiting list. We cannot guarantee that on our waiting list serving personnel would be parachuted to up the scale, but what they will get is they will get individuals who pay particular attention to the needs of the serving personnel and signpost. If we can't offer what they need, we will be able to signpost them to our partners, the private rented sector, the Armed Forces College. There are lots and lots of organisations we are aware of. We can make sure that our housing personnel know how to signpost these individuals, so that they're not going round around the houses, they're actually getting the service they require. And sometimes PSD does require special services, and they may not be in-house, but we know where to get them. And these armed forces colleges have ways of accelerating the lists, the NHS lists as well. So I think what we need to go away with is thinking we cannot guarantee lodgings, but we have enough information about our district, about our partners, how to ensure that serving personnel or those that have served in the armed forces, that their needs are met in terms of housing.
I think there is a concern, I think, there, though, that this has been in place for a couple of years now, and all of that should be fairly easy to access. So why is it difficult? Vina, did you want to come in?
I did, yeah, just to reassure Councillor Armour, because we did actually deal with that issue together, and just to let you know that the individual did get back in touch with me, and I continued working with the Armed Forces Covenant team at Whitehall for advice and guidance to make sure that we weren't disadvantaging that individual. They were awarded priority banding because of their
can we just not go
conditions.
Into just
No, but just to offer that reassurance that it was dealt with. And what has helped is that we have the champion in Housing Solutions, so a direct officer that we can speak to who understands the issues, who's a member of our partnership board, that is there to offer advice and support. And just recently spoken to her about doing some drop-ins around access to housing services to make sure that it's as straightforward and as easy as possible to navigate how people can apply for housing in Kirklees.
Could you just come with your permission, Chair? Yeah. Yes, thank you for that. It seems to me that what we're being told is that things are evolving in the way that the Armed Forces Covenant is applied, which I'm very pleased to hear. I am happy to hear that. I still think we've probably got some way to go, but it does sound as if we are making progress, which I think is important. So my thanks to both for the updated information, if you like. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, one of the real concerns is that there is a huge waiting list, but there's a shrinking housing stock. And the right to buy of council housing shrunk housing stock from 40-odd thousand 20-odd years ago to, well, tens of thousands less. And so you do worry that actually with that shrink, how meaningful is it to actually apply the covenant when there are 17,000 people on a waiting list, when there's what were council houses which have now got students in them, which are now private rented accommodation. I know, and I think it's right that we understand the context to policies like the covenant, and in terms of what we can actually offer people, and does it make the Armed Forces Covenant meaningful when we've got that policy backdrop which is diminishing a social good, which is social housing.
If I may, Chair, the Housing Solutions team does not just discharge their duty around housing into our own social housing stock. We have a very good and growing private sector rented scheme, that, and we also have an exceptionally healthy registered provider cohort across our district, where we work to ensure that we discharged into the right type of provider, the right type of area, etc. we are not unique as an authority in terms of where we are with our housing, but what we are doing is working together to ensure that we make sure that people have an understanding of the choices that are available to them, and then if they wish to wait on a waiting list for a different choice that's not available at this time, then that is always within their gift.
Yes, I'd like to echo some of the comments that Councillor Armour said about how much progress we've made. It's really fantastic to see. And one thing I was very glad to hear is that the service personnel are getting offered other help as well, because sometimes it might be that they need other forms of help rather than housing itself. They might wish to stay with their families, but obviously if they've got the right sort of help in respect to their psychological concerns, that they would be able to live in the home that they're living in. In terms of what Councillor Cooper said, in terms of the housing stock, I think it's difficult. It's not a unique situation for our council, but I'm sure as a cabinet member and your team is working very hard to try and reduce that load and stress, and I certainly see it in the home improvement board that we've got set up, that some great progress will be made on that to try and improve services. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I ask then, turning from housing to health? Okay, because you have got Calderdale and Huddersfield Foundation Trust on your board now, and you are reaching out to Mid Yorkshire, and we certainly hope that Mid Yorkshire can engage with this board. Can I ask about the Mental Health Trust for Kirklees? Because obviously that covers a number of authorities. So how are you working with the Mental Health Trust as well? And how are you ensuring that, because the due regard, it means that the relevant bodies have to have an informed decision making? So how are we ensuring that we have informed decision making, not just within Kirklees, but also within partner organisations such as Health in relation to the covenant? I wonder if somebody could cover that, please. Who's going to answer? Councillor Mather?
I'm going to bring Vina in because I think she's been working with the health partners to see what they are doing and how we're working with them.
Thank you. So as a council, we've signed the covenant because we're committed to supporting the armed forces and the community. And as a council, we want to work with our partners, including Health, to ensure that we work collaboratively where we can to make a difference to the armed forces. But of course, that has to be a voluntary relationship. So the things that we are doing is trying to broaden the membership so that we have that holistic approach, if you like. And there's always new people that we would want to involve in the board, so that is always looked at on a regular basis. In terms of mental health support, we have colleagues from public health and also adults as well that are on the board who've provided input at board meetings around the support that's available, and that's shared via our partner and board networks within the community. We've also updated the website so that there's more information on there about mental health support services, but also other services that our armed forces community can access. So it is very much about the relationship that we develop with our partners, and we're working on that all the time. But it has to come as a voluntary arrangement with our partners. We're not in a position to advocate or ask that they do something in particular, but actually work with us so we can work collectively and collaboratively to improve circumstances for our armed forces.
So at the last board, we had a special presentation for the Armed Forces College, and you would think, oh, they're not on our doorstep. We have 3, one in Kirklees, one in Barnsley, and one in Wakefield, and they put on a lot of online as well as face-to-face courses on areas to do with mental health and well-being, because we are beginning to recognise how important those services are to serving and served personnel, is getting that headspace and having somewhere to drop in and feeling you're in a safe space to talk, somebody who understands, having served. And it was a really, really useful presentation. And I did say that I would go and see the services in operation and what we can do jointly, because it meant that the large number, there's a waiting list for everything. And what they were saying is we have ways and means of accelerating to get you to the top of the list so you can get what you need at the point it's needed rather than wait years for your turn. So it was very useful to have that presentation and to have the college saying that this is how we work. So next time when somebody comes, we know what to do and partners on the board knows what to do.
So there's no formal arrangements with the mental health. It's just through the college, but there's no formal arrangements with the Mental Health Trust Board or the ICB as to how they are ensuring that the commitment to the covenant is fed through their organisations as well. There's nothing in place there to discussion-wise to ensure that that is what is happening.
Chair, not at the moment, but there's no harm in actually asking for that information and formal formal arrangement, because it would help them, because it isn't just the local authority, they themselves are under the same covenant arrangements. So by us going there first enables them to come forward and tell us what they are or are not doing. And here I will ask the chair for help, because I know you sit on a lot of those bodies. And just as Councillor Yusra Hussain mentioned the Housing Improvement Board, which I sit on, it's an opportunity for all of us to take this responsibility seriously and talk about it and raise awareness.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why I was asking the question. Right, okay, so, and also can I ask then about how we as a council take due regard to the covenant when we are taking decisions. So where in the decision process is the discussion as to the covenant? Because there will be different decisions across different areas, won't there? Joanne?
So if we're talking about individual decisions about people and their own welfare, then that obviously would be within the service. But there is a responsibility, and it was raised actually by one of the representatives, both for education and for housing solutions on the board this last week, of how do we understand how our policies change over time to ensure that we have due regard for this. And so one of the things that we as a board need to think about is how do we look at the council's current policies and understand whether it needs to be written within the document, or whether the practices within the service mean that there's not that disadvantage there anyway.
So it's good that there's £20,000 in the budget for helping with the covenant. I'm wondering if that budget's been used, how it's been used, and also, given that it's coming from reserves, how the funding that is being used will be mainstreamed in future years.
Councillor Cooper, I can't say about the future, but I know we've got a small budget. I intend to ensure that that budget is doubled or tripled by partnership contributions, either in kind or financially, in enabling us to move forward on our action plan. So in terms of the future, you know as well as I do that the local government, not just Kirklees, is in a situation where financially means are very, very tight.
Yeah.
So I could not say at this point whether we would mainstream the same amount of funding, but we will be, under my leadership, we will look into that as well as to our partners, so that we combine our efforts to actually increase the kind and amount of work and finances it would need. So I'm not going to let the monies stop us doing what we want in partnership.
Okay, can I just to follow up on that. So the 20k, how's it being used? So how is it being used? How will it be mainstreamed in the future? And yeah, those sort of things. I mean, I appreciate the stuff about leverage, but if in future years we've got 0, then 3 times nothing is 0.
So at the last board meeting, Vina presented quite a helpful paper that had a number of options around how we could spend the £20,000. Board members were asked to give some reflection to that and come back and do some prioritisation, recognising that the aspiration for the board and the financial context in which it is working are difficult, but also recognising what Councillor Mather has just said there, which is that actually what else can other organisations bring to the table, such as potential to host things, venue, learning, etc. So that piece of work to understand how we spend the 20,000 and what makes the most difference to the right people around the table, because it would be wrong of myself, Councillor Mather and Vina to take a decision on apportionment for that. It absolutely has to come from the board itself. That is due to go in front of the board at the next meeting following their own feedback. In terms of the baseline budget, we have an identified budget mechanism as a council, and I would expect, like all the other budgets across the council, that this will have to fight its corner at the next budget round.
Sure. Okay.
Can I, Councillor Seymour, did you want to ask a
No.
question? All right, okay. Can I ask then about the champions within the organisation? Because it's really good that we have those. But how are they supported to ensure that they're able to promote this within the organisation, and about what the covenant is about, and how people within the organisation should be, how that should inform their work? Yeah.
Shall I come in on that one?
Vina,
So they regularly attend the board meetings, so they get to meet other partners, external and internal to the council, and then through information and good practice that I regularly share through the board, so that includes them, and also through service briefings. So I have done some, and I am planning to do others, subject to capacity, and through regular contact around issues that might crop up and seeking their advice, guidance, etc. So it's an ongoing conversation with them, and really through the good practice that we find from our partners and nationally, to look at how we can improve circumstances, and also finding out from them on the types of inquiries that they might be receiving, that they need support with, so they come to us as well. So it's a two-way conversation. So really it's through engagement of the partnership board and the partners, and then good practice sharing. We are really keen to involve other employees that have a military connection, which is why we're doing the survey, to try and identify who they are, and then hopefully involve them as well, for their expertise, their insight, their experience, to really highlight the unique experience that armed forces community have, and what that means for them accessing services moving forward. So we're looking at that experience from those colleagues that have a military background to be a sounding board, if you like, for further good practice and advice on what we can do differently.
Okay, thanks. So coupled with that then, how are you, because you did the Armed Forces Covenant survey in 2021, presumably that's external to the organisation, because it was coordinated by Bradford. And you've said that it didn't have the reach that you'd hoped for. So how
No.
are you, as a board, how are you looking to get feedback from the armed forces community as to whether the work that we're doing in Kirklees is working for them? Yeah.
Yeah.
Councillor Mather,
So-
did you want to come in, or Vina?
Well, I was going to come in, Chair, on the first one about supporting the champions. Of course, it's our responsibility to ensure if our employees are being asked to take on a role on top of their existing roles, that they are appropriately supported. We will be concentrating on those who have lived experience, because there's nothing that is better than that, but they too need to be supported. I've forgotten your current question, Chair.
So it was about the survey external to the organisation, and how you, how are the board hearing voices as to how our approach is working for the armed forces
Okay,
community?
so one of the ways we're hoping that we remain current and relevant and doing the right things is through the partnership board. And making sure that the information online is appropriate. And also, I think we haven't tried this, and I'm just saying this now. There must be a way we can do surveys within the serving personnel, and the Armed Forces College will have some statistics about location of those that have served in the armed forces, and it shouldn't be that difficult to ask a few questions to see if we're doing the right thing.
Vina, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you. Just to add to that. So the survey that was done in 2021 was done across the 5 West Yorkshire local authorities, and across the board it didn't generate a massive response, and I think it probably was too large. So we want to focus on Kirklees, and we're doing that by working with locally based partners. So I've recently had a conversation with one of our local charities who are keen to understand the needs and issues of our armed forces community. So they want to work alongside us and other partners to do that. And I'm in discussion with our data colleagues to look at how we might best do that, taking advice from them. But in terms of the reach, we want to do that by working with our locally based organisations. Now, there's 3 that are involved in the board, as well as obviously other local charities. But we've got one in North Kirklees that covers all of the North Kirklees who've been providing mental health support. There's a rural veteran hub that's set up that covers rural Kirklees, and Tommy's Lounge, which covers Huddersfield. So hoping to work very close with them to develop and deliver a survey so we can better understand the local needs in Kirklees, and hopefully we'll have a better reach by working through our board members and through their networks as well.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's important that we actually hear whether what we are doing is actually on the ground, is actually working for people. Yeah. I just think that is really, really important that we do that. Are there any other points on this item then? So we discussed housing, and you said about drop-ins and housing services and working with partners. Voluntary arrangements for partners regarding the covenant and talking to us about it, but we did ask that to talk to health organisations as to how they were working with the covenant, so we have an understanding of that, so we have some more joint working. We asked about budget and how that's going to be used going forward, and we also asked about hearing the voices of the armed forces community as to whether we are...
And take-up of training.
Yeah, and the take-up of training. Yeah. Yes. Okay. All right. So thank you ever so much for coming for that item. If you want to leave, please do. Okay. We won't be offended. You're okay. And we will move then.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Vina. And thank you, Richard, for your attendance as well this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Right then, we will move on to item 8, which is the Council Financial Management updates. Now on this, it is a presentation, I believe, that we have. And we note that the outturn report for Cabinet is now public. So presumably your presentation has been updated with the information that is already in the public domain for this meeting. Okay. Dean, do you want to? All right, we'll just give you a minute to sort out the presentation.
So, as you've rightly pointed out, this does reflect the outturn position that has just been reported. All the detail around the outturn is in that report, and I've kind of picked out of that the key headlines. The reason for that is that understanding the Council's financial position is always best started with your latest outturn position and understanding what that means. And then what I've sought to do is just look ahead. You've seen the medium-term financial plan previously, but I'll rehearse that as well. And picking up on the point made at the workshop previously, I've got both the revenue and the capital. I've got HRA, but I'm not sure whether you're that interested in HRA at this point. That's at the end of the presentation, but revenue and capital is in here. So, moving through then. So, the provisional revenue outturn position for 22-23. Provisional because, of course, the accounts have to be audited by the external auditor. So, you've got a table there which shows you the headlines of the outturn position. So, at Q3, the Council was forecasting an overspend of just over £30 million. The provisional outturn position is an overspend of £27 million. So, it's slightly improved when compared to Q3. In terms of how that variance is analysed, you've got there on the right-hand side what's previously been deemed as the cost of living variance, and I'll come on to that. And then other reasons why the budget has varied, and again, I'll come on to the reasons for that. So you'll notice the second line to the bottom is the change in the use of reserves. So in essence, the entirety of the overspend has been funded by the Council's reserves, as it's required to do. There is no other place to go. It's got to fund it from reserves, because, of course, as you're all familiar, you've got to have a balanced budget, not allowed to have a deficit budget. So in terms of the cost of living variance, which in total is around £15 million, there are three main components to that. Pay award, so it was... my predecessor would have had great difficulties, I did at my previous council, forecasting what pay award would have been in the last financial year. And I think it's quite difficult to get that right. And of course, the additional cost of that has been 8.6 million in the last year. Likewise, energy inflation, you're all familiar with the volatility of the cost of energy throughout the year. And it was incredibly difficult to predict what that would be with rising prices all the way through the year. And only at the moment are they starting to come down gradually, albeit not for the council because of the nature of the contracts it's in. And then fuel and food inflation. So inflation, cost of living stuff is something that the council itself hasn't been immune to. So in terms of the other variance, which is about net £11 million, you'll appreciate across the range of the directorates of the council, there have been a variety of other variations. And perhaps to summarise, you could class some of this as the overhang of COVID. So some of the demand that was there prior to COVID that we'd expect to come back just hasn't come back as quickly as anticipated. Things like car parking income still down, markets income still down, bereavement services still down. So those are the kind of things. And then you've had the cost of living impact, so people using our services are less. And then there are just some demand pressures. So a prime example of that would be the post-16 transport, home-to-school transport, where the numbers of users has increased significantly. And that combined with the fuel increase price, you see a significant overspend in that area. So I'm assuming quite a bit of this isn't unfamiliar to you, because it's things that have been reported in subsequent monitoring reports as they've been delivered throughout the year. But you can see there a range of pressures that the council has felt. I think the thing to perhaps point out is some of those pressures will have been dealt with in the budget process. Some of them may not have been, and may therefore persist throughout the year, and may continue to be issues which the council will have to consider. And in terms of balancing the budget and its impact on reserves, you can see there that excluding any ring fence reserves, things like schools balances, which are really not the council's reserves but our schools base, we started the year with 122 million and we've ended the year with 84 million. So a substantial drawdown of reserves during the year to support the council's budget. So that was the position at the end of March this year. Of course, when we set the budget for the current year, a substantial proportion of the reserves was used in support of this year's budget, but I'll come on to that in a second. In terms of the capital programme, and I've done this by the priority within the capital programme, so it isn't the individual schemes, but I'll come on to that. The programme was underspent by just under £32 million. And you can see the greater part of that underspend is to do with the economic part of the capital programme. So some of the bigger schemes that you're probably familiar with, Cultural Heart, town centre plans and things like that. So you see there, Cultural Heart, £8.5 million underspent, partly to the reprofiling of the spend. Unspent on the town centre action plans, delays in funding, planning consents and things like that. Capital plan was under. New places for secondary schools and so on. So those are the main reasons for the underspend on the capital programme. And of course, because you underspend, then you use less of the funding that was identified for the programme as well. The thing I would point out with this is none of that funding is lost. It's just carried forward with the commitments that go forward with the capital programme into the current year and subsequent years. So there's a report going to Cabinet next week that has more detail in relation to both of those areas. We're in the process of doing the statement of accounts, which is the formal financial accounts of the council. And at some point, the external auditors will come along and audit all of that and then sign off the accounts, hopefully, at some point later this year. So, just looking at our current financial year. So, the budget was set back in March. Net revenue budget of 373 million, funded mainly from council tax and government grants, but then there's a shortfall which was again funded by the council's unallocated reserves. So at the end of March, you're looking at the block on the right, we had £47 million of unallocated reserves. In essence, we've used about half of that to support the budget in the current year. That leaves us with 22.4 million of unallocated reserves by the end of this financial year, on the basis that we don't overspend and we deliver all the savings that are required to be delivered. That's broadly 6% of our net revenue expenditure. If you've read the report back in March to council in terms of what's the minimum balance the council should have, it gives parameters of between 5 and 10% of unallocated reserves of the net revenue expenditure. So we're within that. Arguably, the way of estimating what kind of balances and reserves what you should have, it should be a risk-based analysis rather than just a pure 5% or 10%. So that's a piece of work that's underway at present. I wouldn't anticipate it would be much different to that, but it just reflects the risk that the council is faced with. Just some of the assumptions underpinning all of that. So when that budget was set, the assumption was that pay award would be 6%. Since then, the employers have made an offer that equates to around 6.2%. You'll appreciate that's an offer, not an award, so that's still to be debated. The unions, I believe, will be balloting for industrial action on that, so who knows where that will go. So the likelihood is that we won't have enough money in for pay award. On that understanding, services have been asked to find additional savings as a consequence of that. The energy budgets were increased by 25%, recognising that the cost of energy had increased significantly. So there is substantial provision in the budget for energy increases, and we are starting to see the price of energy come down. I think it is too early to say at this point whether the budget is sufficient or not. As with most councils in the current climate, no general inflation provision is made. You might think that's odd in the context of 10% inflation, or however it is now, 8.7%. But never, it is kind of one of those things that's become standard in local government because for the last 10, 12 years we've had really low inflation. That said, there are specific contracts where we have provided inflation for. Income budgets assumed to increase by 1.5%. That's either a volume increase or a price increase. So that's where you'll see some of the price increases coming through. And as I said earlier on, the budget assumes just under £19 million worth of savings to be achieved. There is also an assumption that we will use flexible capital receipts. So this is the ability to charge revenue expenditure against capital receipts. It's a scheme the government's run for a few years now, and that's assumed within the budget. And as I said, planned use reserves is just under £25 million. And finally, the collection rates for both council tax and business rates are given there. And over a period of time, the council does generally get to those levels of collection. Just in terms of some of the monitoring that we're doing at the moment, and this isn't comprehensive, but it's just some of the things that you probably just need to be aware of. So we're keeping a track of inflation. So this week we'll get the May inflation figures and see whether the plan to bring that inflation is coming down. But I think you're probably picking up already, there's going to be another rate rise. The debate is whether it's 0.25 or 0.5% on Thursday to try to quell inflation. So you can get a sense by that discussion that's going on that the government and the Bank of England is still concerned about inflation and the rate at which it's coming down, the speed at which it's coming down. I've already mentioned the unbudgeted pay pressure that we've had, and there was also an additional £1.5 million of efficiency savings within the £19 million that needed to be found, and services have identified those proposals and are starting to implement them. As you would expect us to do, we're reviewing fees and charges. That exercise is underway with a view to agreeing charge increases where we can do so. There is an inflation contingency for some of the specific contracts, and we're already starting to use that, particularly on the waste contract. And just a couple of final points. As with any budget, and particularly in areas like children's and adults, then demand is always a difficult thing to predict, not least because it's impacted by a variety of different things. So it's always something that needs to be kept under constant review, and there are a number of trackers that we're running that help us do that. And I've mentioned energy, but the other thing that we need to keep an eye on is treasury management. Of course, if the rate rises are coming through nationally, they'll start to influence council borrowing too, and we're seeing that now. We're seeing PWB rates, even at the lower end, topping 6%. So we need to be careful when we borrow and how much we borrow as well. So the medium-term financial plan, this is largely unchanged from what you've seen previously. So this was reported to Council on the 8th of March. Looking ahead, there's a gap in 24-25 of £30 million. There's no use of reserves because there's limited reserves to support the Council's budget. That's increased by about £5 million for reasons I'll come on to, but it is £30 million and work is underway to try to identify savings that will be put in place to try to balance the budget going ahead. Solve that problem, it solves the problem into the future. I must say that one of my early jobs, as you know, I'm new to the council, is to review the medium-term financial plan to make sure it's robust, that it does reflect some of the pressures that the council is faced with. So some of those assumptions, so I mentioned the reason why we've gone from a medium-term gap of £25 million in 24-25 to 30 is because the pay award assumption has been changed. Because inflation isn't coming down quickly enough, the likelihood is that pay award for local government will be higher than was previously assumed. So that's gone from 2% to 4%. Again, no general inflation provision, but equally if inflation is coming down at the rate expected, then that shouldn't present an issue. The budget already assumes £11.5 million savings that were agreed back in March. So not only did you agree £19 million for this year, there was also an agreement for £11 million next year. Same assumption on flexible cap receipts. As I've said, no planned use of reserves in that budget, and council tax is assumed to increase by 4.99% in 24-25 and 25-26, which is predicted to be the maximum that it could be in those years if you take into account the social care precept, and then drop into 2.99%. And again, the collection rates are as previously stated. Capital programme looking ahead. The council has an ambitious capital programme, particularly in terms of its economic regeneration of the multiple town centres. So that's the reason why that stands out so significantly in the centre there in terms of its investment. And just some of the things that are in there. So you've got the new schools, which are crucial to the delivery of more spaces, the sufficiency for high needs. Some transport schemes, which I think you're familiar with, the George Hotel, the action plans, and of course the most significant one, which is the cultural heart. So those are the key projects within the capital programme over the next 5 years. And that's how it's proposed to fund the programme. So quite a lot coming from capital grants and other contributions, some from capital receipts, the bulk from the council's borrowing into the future. So I was going to ask questions at that point, but on the HRA, sorry, I just added these on at the end. So the HRA outturn was a slight overspend of 1.6 million, albeit just note there that there's a use of reserves of £8.5 million. That's to reflect the kind of investment both in repairs and maintenance and also the housing management function as well. And in terms of the reserves, we've dropped from 54 million down to 44 million. Bearing in mind there's a 30-year business plan that's underpinned by all of the the housing revenue account is underpinned by a 30-year business plan that has to be balanced over that 30-year period. So balancing the need for investment versus the sustainability of the housing revenue account is crucial. And that's the capital programme slightly underspent in the year. So, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Can you just go back to the slide where it said about the council tax level increase levels? There, yes. So can I just get clarity on that? Because it says council tax increase of 4.99 in 24-25 and 25-26, and then 2.99 in 25-26. So you've got the same year twice. Is it 4.99?
My apologies. 26-27.
Right, okay.
Sorry, my apologies.
That's fine. I just wanted to clarify that because it just looked a bit confusing.
It's not 7%.
No,
Sorry,
I just wanted to clarify that was the case. Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to questions then. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Cooper.
Okay, so we've got an underspend on capital of 32 million. I'm just wondering about the revenue impact of that and thinking, how does this help our planning? Because obviously if we're not spending what we thought we were going to spend, that means we will probably have a bit more revenue, and how do we apply that, and is it inconvenient? I'm also wondering what capacity, in terms of income, we've got an expected income of 1.5% increase. Now, I presume that's from just increasing fees and charges, but I'm just wondering if there's any work being done on income generation and what we can and what capacity we have as an organisation to look at new opportunities for income generation. So that's important. Another one, I guess, is energy. We can either pay for the energy or we can improve the energy efficiency and things of our buildings. Just wondering if you're satisfied that there is that there's an action plan, if you like, to manage the energy of our buildings and what services are doing to actually do something about No planned use of reserves in 24-25. Is that realistic? Do you think that that's actually what will actually happen, or is that just wishful thinking, I guess? And cultural heart, it's supposed to be a decade of ambition. I'm just wondering if it's going to be like a couple of decades of ambition. If they might have to change the slogan to enable us to be financially solvent.
Thanks for those questions, Councillor. So in terms of the underspend, my understanding is that we'd forecast an underspend when we were setting the budget for 23-24. So the revenue benefit that you would get generally from underspending the capital programme would be your requirement to set aside for repayment of debt. We'd already factored that into the budget in 23-24. And likewise, the fact that we may not have borrowed is to some extent countered by the fact that interest rates have gone up anyway. So you might be borrowing less, but the cost of borrowing when you do it is going to be more. And again, that had been factored into the plan. In terms of income and fees and charges, of course, the 1.5% could be volume increases, it could be price increases, it could be a combination of the two. And it could be on the basis of existing income lines, and it could be on new income lines. I don't know the answer to the question, are we exploring new income lines? But as I understand it, my colleagues in the directorates are working to find other ways in which to generate income where they can and where the market will sustain that as well. Now, how widespread that is, I don't know, to be honest. But if you probably think over the 12, 13 years of austerity, all of the new ideas for generating income have gone round the mill in terms of that, in my view. But you may have other ideas that the council isn't exploring. In terms of energy, and energy efficiency of buildings, my understanding again is quite a bit of the saving that we've achieved in year has been a consequence of the energy management measures that were put in place to try to control the cost increases that we're being faced with as a council. What is in the capital programme to try to introduce new things, I don't know, if I'm honest, and I'm happy to respond to you separately on that, if that helps. In terms of use of reserves, is that a realistic assumption? I think what I would say to you is it is the most realistic assumption at this point in time, given the balance of reserves that we've got. I think the council needs to set its budget without using reserves because there are insufficient reserves to call on at this point in time. So the answer is yes. In terms of the cultural heart, well, having been chief executive of the local authority, you've got to have plans and you've got to have a vision, you've got to have an ambition. And and whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 5 years, you've got to have that in order to deliver something. Because what you do with that coalesces people around your plans and you get funding coming in. So I would say that it's still a sound plan. And with any plan, you're going to have bumps in the road along the way. And, financial challenges are no less a bump than other things. So the council needs to have that ambition to deliver those kinds of schemes, not least for the benefit of the residents. And it may take a bit longer to deliver it, but it needs to stick to the plan of delivering it.
Can I just ask, just to clarify, you're saying about the use of reserves. There are definitely no plans at this moment in time to use any reserves because what you're saying is there is not sufficient reserves there. Is that what you're saying? That there's not sufficient reserves to cover a large shortfall in the budgets this time?
Yeah, I think the kind of
that is what you're saying.
said
Yeah,
that,
that's
so,
what you're saying. So can I ask then how that is being managed across the organisation to ensure that we are looking at our costs, but also with the rate of borrowing going up, how we're profiling what we're borrowing to ensure that the cost of borrowing is not meaning that we cannot provide essential services because our cost of borrowing is outweighing the rest of the budgets.
Yeah, so in response to the first part of the question, clearly because of the pressure on the budget to deliver the savings that are necessary, so there's an incredible amount of work going on about delivery in terms of the budget that's been set. And the key message is, as I've said to you, we can't overspend and we should deliver the savings. And where we see pressures, then savings should be delivered over and above what we're currently doing that. So there is a tremendous amount of work going on at the moment about that. In terms of the cost of borrowing and its impact on the budget, well, we did factor some of that into the budget, so we did anticipate the cost of borrowing may well change, albeit perhaps not to the extent that it has. There are ways of delaying borrowing. Of course, you can slow down the capital programme. You can not do parts of the programme straight away. You can do it later. And what you see in the paper here is what's called prudential borrowing. So prudential borrowing may not necessarily lead to actual borrowing at the time that it's done. There are timing differences. So borrowing is as much of a cash flow management as it is about actually funding a capital scheme. So if we're wise enough and we're good enough at treasury management, we can time the borrowing when the rates start coming down if we've got the financial capacity to do that. The value of holding reserves is to give you that capacity. So, you know, that's we would use our expertise where we can do so to try to manage the cost of borrowing and not necessarily take it too early or take it at a time when it's cheaper, if that answers the question.
No problem. Yeah, just wondering about in terms of the opportunities aspect of things. I mean, I think there are a number of things that different councils have done. I'm thinking about Oxford City Council, where they've got direct services, Oxford Direct Services, which support their council budget through services they offer to residents, which are beyond, if you like, it's a fully council-owned company, and you know, looking at things like that. Workplace parking levies used by Nottingham City Council, which brings in about 9 million a year. So there are things that we don't do that other councils do, and I'm just wondering whether we have the capacity within the organisation to take opportunities, and that's one of the things that I think is worth looking at, to see whether some of those income generation opportunities that we could take are things that we can do. That flexibility, really. Otherwise, are we just managing a difficult situation as opposed to other things? On the energy side of things, I do wonder, a lot of the savings that the council's made have been about roughly 50% of the savings are due to disposals of properties as opposed to improving the energy efficiency of buildings. And so again, it's a capacity issue. We have a direct services, building services organisation, and it's, are we using them to the sufficiently to enable us to reduce our energy costs by fitting solar panels in, improving energy efficiency. We won a prize a few years ago for being a solar panel installer as a council. But you know, I'm just wondering whether we still have that capacity.
It's a difficult one for me to answer at this point in my career at Kirklees. However, I've no doubt. Yeah, well, I mean, I've no doubt that officers have taken, you know, the responsibility of trying to find different ways of doing things. I would find it unusual that we don't somewhere have solar panels on some buildings. Yeah, so and where that opportunity exists. Of course, in those instances, I suspect the government has provided the funding in order to allow us to do that, and we've taken the opportunity with the return on it. So I'm happy to look at it and pass it on to my colleagues to come back to you if that helps.
Can I ask about the corporate fees and charges review? So are you aware of where that is at this moment in time, and when is it due to report?
So
Do you know?
Yeah, as I understand it, the work's underway at the moment, and the likelihood is it will report in October.
Right, thank you. In October. Okay.
I think sorry, Chairman, the idea is to try to take advantage of an earlier report, because I think previously it may be the case where we've been reporting in advance of the coming year. Well, why don't we do it sooner than that and try to take advantage of it?
Yeah, I'm just want to know from obviously a scrutiny perspective for timeframes for things like that, but also bearing in mind that if we are looking to review fees and charges, people have to be able to afford the fees and charges that we may be reviewing. So, yes, whilst understanding the council's underlying budget position as well. Right, okay. You did mention about parking, having a very large, the income from parking had I think it's just over £1 million on your sheet, 1.1 million difference from what was budgeted for the income from that. So is there anything being looked at as to things like parking and things?
Well, I think as one of the proposals that's already been agreed as part of the budget is a review of parking. Now, not entirely sure of the detail of that, and I've no doubt it will include reviewing the pricing of parking, but that's part of the budget proposals that have been agreed for both this year and next year as well. So inevitably something will be coming forward in due course.
Yeah, I mean, we've lost provision of parking here in the town centre just across the road, so and that's going to be dealt with by the Cultural Heart, and a smaller car park is going to be built as a consequence. So, you know, I suppose there's the relationship between how much we provide and how much we charge, and
I think,
also, you know, electric charging points which we could use to generate income. You know, the council could be the petrol station of the future.
Indeed. So are there any other questions? No? Okay. So thank you for coming and giving us this update. We will be having, as you know, the management committee has taken on the corporate portfolio scrutiny role with changes in the panels this year, and therefore the financial information will be coming to OSMC, and we're looking for that to come in the relevant timescales. It may mean we have to move a meeting a little bit to fit in with those timescales, but also looking to have something in between the quarterly reports to look into particular areas that we may wish to focus on. Okay, so thank you for that, Dean. Thank you very much. Right, okay, so we move now on to item 9, allocation of co-optees. The report is in the papers for co-optees. You will see that as I've mentioned, we do have a change in the panels this year. So environment and climate change is in place instead of economy and neighbourhoods, and we have a regeneration and growth panel now. So there is some movement of co-optees that were on the corporate panel and who were on the economy and neighbourhoods panel into the new regeneration and environment panels. We also have 2 of the co-optees who've completed their 4-year term but have been asked and have very kindly agreed to continue for another 12 months. Without the work of the co-optees on our panels, I think we would find it a lot more difficult to actually carry out the scrutiny function. And I think we would want to record our thanks to all the co-optees who have been involved over the last year. We have some who are retiring, and our thanks to those as well. Do we have any other points that we wish to raise? So do we agree that the allocation of scrutiny co-optees for the year be thanked for their continued commitment to the work of scrutiny? We do have one member on the children's panel who's been there a considerable length of time, and our special thanks to her. Do we also agree that the existing serving co-optees be thanked for their continued commitment and contribution to the work of scrutiny in Kirklees? Is that
Yes.
agreed? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that that moves us on to, and I've lost my piece of paper, there we go. It moves us on to the next meeting then, which is for the 1st of August, and we hope to have the leader and corporate portfolio holder priorities for this coming year, and we will also have the scrutiny panel work programmes to look at, as well as our own work programme. And with that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance today. Thank you.